Before I get into this, I feel I should say that there will be no best and worst of the decade video because the idea of it makes my anus do that spasm thing, so fuck that shit, I'll bash it out now. Congratulations to Pacific Rim and The Pyramid for receiving the first ever Barely Breathing Review's Best and Worst of the Decade award respectively. To be fair, foresight dictates that it's probably going to be the last as well because I can't see the internet putting up with this shit for another 10 years. Remember back in 2017 when 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, Darkest Hour and The Shape of Water became award magnets but didn't make it to my podium because of conflicting release dates but managed to completely invade it the following year. As a result of this, I had to fatten the video out with 2 new categories, aka The Pleasant Surprise and Hideous Disappointment of 2018. No need to this time around because all the movies on my podium were globally released in 2019, but because I sort of want to break 20 minutes, including intro and outro, I'm going to do it anyway in the name of auteurism, and let's be real here. It would benefit you to take a 20 or so minute break from staring into that mostly empty bottle of bourbon whilst wondering what the fuck happened. I'm not projecting at all. Obviously, I haven't seen every single film released in 2019, my schedule simply won't allow it. On average, I go to the cinema once a week and occasionally the following visit could be dedicated to a rewatch. Also, and this should really go without saying, but movies, like any form of art, are entirely subjective. So if you don't like any of my choices, by all means come at me with healthy debate, but be warned I'm more stubborn than my doctor's leniency regarding aborting a 9-month-old. Tolkien is taking bronze this year. A written review of this shamelessly biased choice can be found in the Barely Bloody Readable section of my website. I am not going to recite it to you because despite knowing that as the movie was unravelling before my eyes it would undoubtedly make this podium, I never wrote my review with the intention of it going beyond that format. Reason being is that it is, and forever will be, the cleanest piece of content I have created and no one comes to my corner of the internet for that type of material. It's child friendly as fuck. There is no dark humour, no references of any kind towards coitus, consented or otherwise, and believe it or not there isn't a single profanity present within the 1600 plus words dedicated to recommending Tolkien. Why? Because I wanted to challenge myself, and writing a review on a biographical movie about an internationally revered figure in literature as well as someone who I just happen to have immense respect for seemed apropos for this occasion. Despite not being entirely of sound mind during parts of the writing process, I did proofread it at several variations of influence so it made sense on many levels as well as having it analysed by those more qualified than myself regarding the world of words. What I'm saying is my review, much like the movie, is worth your time. Yes, I know that its source material brings in limited interest because, well, is it not tradition that most of the time brilliance is overshadowed by ineptitude? Watch Tolkien. Reviewing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood without spoilers is a task I am not willing to attempt because the result would lack substance. So if you're watching this video without seeing this movie but intend to do so, I recommend hitting the pause button and checking out this beautiful piece of filmmaking and then get back to me. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a love letter written by Quentin Tarantino to cinema's golden age as well as the late 60s, a time period where a young Tarantino was most likely starting to fall in love with the industry. The film follows fictional character Rick Dalton, a veteran actor from the 50s who fears that his career is taking a turn for the worst, and his part-time stuntman, full-time drinking buddy, chauffeur and best friend Cliff Booth, with late 60s Hollywood serving as the backdrop, and there really isn't much more to it than that. It really does feel like the events that take place are a part of their quotidian, and it just so happens that the cameras were rolling on this occasion. Every actor involved, regardless of how big or small their role was, brought their A-game, but the show belonged to Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt. The chemistry between these two is truly a sight to behold, and their combined performances make you feel like you're hanging out with them as opposed to watching a movie. This makes Once Upon a Time in Hollywood immersive as fuck. The old school cinematography that perfectly depicts the camera work from movies shot in the actual late 60s as well as the golden age of rock and roll playlist that blankets the gorgeous set design gives you the impression you've stumbled into a TARDIS, fell into the controls and transported to a time when the drink driving laws were nowhere near as strict and everyone was under the impression that cheese wasn't as bad for you. What a time to be alive. Portrayals of celebrities are dotted all over the place, and it didn't make me perceive that they were there for the sheer fuck of it. Each figure from the industry would have been undoubtedly present in Hollywood during this period of time, and they are all woven efficiently into the storyline. Collectively, the performances have received varied reception, with Mike Moe's Bruce Lee getting the worst of it. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was not released in Chinese cinemas because its government, as well as Bruce Lee's daughter, didn't approve of the way he was portrayed in a particular scene, despite Moe receiving critical praise for the role. The scene in question is a daydream belonging to Cliff Booth recalling a time where he was working on the same set as Bruce Lee. The main critique this this part of the movie has obtained is that Mose Lee was showing traits that simply didn't belong to Bruce, and the adaptation was overall lazy and, I quote, somewhat racist. Because reasons, the scene also contained a sparring match between Booth and arguably the most revered figure in the history of martial arts, and to have the fight go any other way outside of Cliff being Bruce's personal punch bag would have been regarded as an insult. Unfortunately, the match was interrupted before it had the chance to conclude and was very even until that point. The Chinese government wasn't happy about this, so they asked Tarantino to remove the entire scene from the movie. The request was denied, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was never released in China, which would have been a bitter blow to its box office success. What's my takeaway from all this? Well, regarding the way Tarantino handled Bruce Lee's personality, I am in no real position to comment, because not only have I never met Lee, I have in fact never walked the earth at the same time as the man, nor have I ever really gone out of my way to read or watch any biographical material that would provide me with better insight. So a more in-depth comparison of this aspect of Moe's performance belongs in the hands of someone way more qualified than myself. Before I give my opinion on the fight, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is a non-fiction movie that contains alternative historical elements, meaning that some or even all of the events that took place for the most part did happen but have been modified in some form or another. Also, as previously mentioned, this scene is a daydream in the head of a fictional character, so perhaps for the sake of his own internal ego he decided to remember it differently, but in reality he was turned into Bruce Lee's punch bag. Either way, I personally don't believe that the scene was designed to disrespect Bruce Lee, his family, or the country of China. I think it was constructed to highlight Cliff Booth's fighting skills and physicality, so his actions further on in the movie weren't completely out of context. More on that later. And what better way to demonstrate this than to have him go toe-to-toe with one of the all-time greats and have them both come out of it mostly unscathed. For the record, I had Lee by TKO in the second round. Margot Robbie received universal acclaim for her performance as Sharon Tate, and rightfully so. Robbie owns every single scene she is in, to the point where your attention refuses to deviate from her. Yes, she has a surprisingly low amount of dialogue, but her presence, movement, and beautiful costume design, which included some of Sharon Tate's actual jewelry courtesy of her sister, was so captivating that speech would have undermined her aura. It was also really refreshing to see a piece of medium where Sharon Tate was depicted as a human being instead of a victim of tragedy, in a Tarantino movie featuring the Manson family no less. Speaking of that, Damon Herriman's Charlie deserved way more fucking screen time, not only because the actor slayed the part in Mindhunter, so why not utilise the already proven capability, but people who aren't familiar with the events taking place in Hollywood at this particular point in time wouldn't know who he or those hippies at Spahn Ranch are. Charlie is in front of our eyes for less than 2 minutes. He never introduces himself, and his surname is never mentioned at any point during the 2 hours and 40-minute duration. So the unaware could easily be forgiven if they left Once Upon a Time in Hollywood perplexed, because it's almost like Tarantino was being deliberately subliminal about Manson's involvement, which is a shame because those unable to piece it together are missing out on a huge chunk of atmosphere generated by the movie. For the people who are in the know about Manson's activity in the late 60s, those 105 seconds or so were more than enough to set the tone, and it continued when we got to the infamous Spahn Ranch. Here you got to feel a powerful tension that governed the entire scene, and when familiar Manson family names were being introduced, that tension only increased. It only took the mere mention of Charlie's name to fortify the suspense, despite him being almost exclusively off screen. So kudos to everyone involved who managed to create Charles Manson themed tension with just a few name drops courtesy of some burnt youths and practically no Charles Manson. It's genuinely quite impressive. When you consider all the factors involved in the narrative and the man helming it all, you come to the conclusion that on paper Once Upon a Time in Hollywood had the potential to be violent as fuck, but it turned out to be the opposite. Mostly. Blood wasn't even spilled until 1 hour and 50 minutes in, and that conflict only lasted 45 seconds. After that we had to wait until the movie was nearing its conclusion for us to see it spill again, and with only 15 or so minutes to go, the film underwent a dramatic makeover. Allow me to set the scene. It's the evening of August the 8th, 1969, which in the world of non-fiction is the night that a heavily pregnant Sharon Tate gets murdered by the Manson family. However, in this alternative version of the story, the family were indeed en route to kill the occupants of the Tate Polanski household, but ended up in a touch of strife with a drunk Rick Dalton who told them to fuck off. They fucked off, regrouped, and returned moments later with the intention to kill Dalton and then move on to their original target. In between the Manson family and our protagonist is a completely fucked Cliff Booth and his dog, which at Booth's command can inflict more damage than the battering Mario Duplantier puts his drum kit through. Although the family had 2 knives and a gun at their disposal to aid their campaign against a compromised Cliff Booth and his companion, you couldn't, because of previous events, help but theorise that the family were out of their depth. A theory that only took 4 minutes to be proven correct. The fight was brutal, graphic, and complemented perfectly by the savage sound effects. I personally preferred this alternative version of August the 8th, 1969 99 over actuality because it was way more entertaining and the coup de grace was a thing of fucking beauty. So yeah, this film is very Tarantino, and fans of his will have fun looking for the Easter eggs and connections to his previous work. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has more than earned a position on the podium and a chunk of the most sought out piece of brass in the film industry. Is it the best movie Tarantino has ever made? Of course it fucking isn't, dickhead. Although on a technical level, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is the superior movie, as far as personal preference is concerned, I'm more in favour of Fighting with My Family. Yes, it's way more niche than the silver medalist, but I am very much a part of the target audience. I love pro wrestling. It played a massive role during my childhood and I haven't drifted at all from the industry to this day. Before I go any further, yes, I am aware that wrestling is scripted. I would like to go more thoroughly into the discussion over why that doesn't dilute my enjoyment or respect towards sports entertainment. However, I intend to go way more in depth in my pilot episode of a new video series called Barely Breathing Rants and Recreation, so watch this space. But what I will say for now is yes, wrestling is scripted, or fake if you will. However, so are the tits belonging to many porn stars, but the knowledge of that fact doesn't prevent me from enjoying them. Believe me. Fighting with My Family is a mostly accurate biographical movie that tells the tale of English wrestler Saraya Jade Bevis, aka Paige, and her rise to WWE stardom by ways of World Association of Wrestling, an independent wrestling promotion ran by Paige and her family. Historically speaking, this is quite an important film. Paige was a pioneer of the women's revolution, a movement that began in 2015 with the aim to give female talent increased TV time and respect in WWE, as well as abolishing cliches in the industry that exploit their bodies. The campaign is an ongoing success. Not only has the ripple effect drifted into other promotions, we have also seen all-female Royal Rumbles, which has led them to headlining WrestleMania. There have also been pay-per-views that feature ladies matches exclusively, and most impressively, a televised women's bout has taken place in Saudi Arabia as a result of the movement. So technically speaking, this movie serves as a sort of origin story to the women's revolution. Fighting with My Family is defined as a comedy drama, and I couldn't describe it better myself. The movie makes you surf on a wave of emotions for its entirety and doesn't relent at any point. The action, comedy and drama are perfectly balanced and never lessen one another when sharing the screen. This of course is down to efficient writing being brought to life by a talented cast. Florence Pugh fucking nails it as Paige. Her portrayal of the youngest ever WWE Women's Champion at time of writing received high praise from Paige herself. Considering they didn't even meet until after the movie was released, Pugh perfected the mannerisms, body language and vocal traits belonging to the Norwich native. When you look at the entourage of talent, you could easily assume that the spotlight will flirt with the idea of leaving our lead, but make no mistake about it, this is very much her movie. Yes, there are cameos from WWE superstars, but they never managed to steal said spotlight from Pugh. Well, aside from The Rock of course, but he can't be blamed for that, because he's The Rock. Speaking of the entourage, Jack Lowden provides a solid supporting performance as Paige's brother Zach. You can't help but be invested in the journey they take together. You feel every shred of the highs and lows experienced by the characters, and you really want them both to succeed. But if you know wrestling, or more specifically WWE, you know the latter doesn't make it to NXT, which is WWE's farm system to main roster. Despite this knowledge, you root for him regardless, but the movie doesn't build up hope and deflate it at the very end. Fuck no, it's way more merciless than that. For most of its 108-minute duration, Zack embraces trial by error while seeing his sister getting closer to achieving their shared dream. This of course causes confliction between the siblings in and out of the ring, plus because the chemistry between the actors is so fucking good, it didn't make for an easy watch for the audience as well as their on-screen parents. Fuck it, that segue will do. I dare you. In fact, I double dare you, motherfucker, to not fall in love with Nick Frost and Lena Headey's version of Paige's parents. When I found out that he and she had been selected for the roles, I was concerned that they were both too typecast. But thankfully their performances, and indeed the movie as a whole, are so immersive that at no point did I feel like I was watching a member of the Cornetto trilogy sporting a delicious mohawk beard combination. Neither was I under the impression that I was seeing Cersei Lannister wearing leopard skin, leather trousers and hair that looked like it was cut by one of the Stygian witches. Vince Vaughn contributes a very Vince Vaughn performance as Hutch Morgan. The fictional character was so dry, deadpan, condescending, patronising, yes there is a difference, and emits an essence of failed suicide which I imagine to be extremely appropriate for a recruiter and coach employed by the WWE. What I really liked about the aforementioned cast is that they all carry the definition of the movie within them. No one is given a specific role. For example, Ricky isn't exclusively exclusively there in the name of comic relief, and our protagonist doesn't exist for the sake of drama and drama alone. Everyone is very balanced with versatile personalities. This means that there was room for possible character development across the board, and I am happy to report that everyone walked over their potential arc in fluidic fashion. Apart from The Rock, of course, because he's The Rock. What do you expect from him? The dude is like a great white shark. He doesn't need to evolve. Is it flawless? Of course not. Well, at least it isn't in the eyes of this reviewer. I wasn't overly keen on the foundation of Paige's stage fright when it came to using the mic on the grander scale was established, and her time in NXT came across as a training camp that's duration was shorter than my average sex tape, when in actual fact she was Queen Bee at the development program for 2 years before being transferred to main roster. When it comes to the former, you could argue that it's not completely out of character for a sports entertainment crowd to behave this way, and you would have a point. I have been in attendance at many wrestling events from the independent circuit to mainstream over the years, so I can confirm they have the tendency to be savage. I'm not questioning the realism of the spectators, I just think the scene could have been more tasteful. Regarding the latter complaint, I know I said earlier that Fighting With My Family is a mostly accurate biographical movie, but I feel that her time in NXT should have been explored more deeply. Her 2 years in the brand was a pivotal time in her career and indeed the history of the WWE. In NXT, Paige immortalized herself as the first ever and youngest women's champion before being promoted to the main circuit, where, as previously mentioned, she continued to break records. I don't know why the writers decided against including this part of her in-ring history, because it would have added so much more substance to the storyline. Plus, its non-attendance undermines Paige's accomplishments as far as the unaware or casual viewer is concerned. Speaking of, although I said earlier that I fit nicely into the movie's target audience, you don't have to be heavily into wrestling to appreciate or enjoy Fighting With My Family. I have spoken to people, I know right, the toils I put myself through in the name of journalistic integrity, who wouldn't consider themselves fans of sports entertainment, but enjoyed the fuck out of this feature. It's not just a wrestling movie. It's a very well written, efficiently executed, and overall fun film that sends you on a roller coaster of emotions, with wrestling serving as its foundation. Plus, it introduced me to the phrase "dick me dead and bury me pregnant." So yeah, place on the podium well earned. I Am Mother was initially going to supply the background fodder for Netflix and Chill, which, to the disappointment of somebody I imagine, had to be abandoned because I was getting way too distracted by the movie. Why? Because it's good. Pleasantly surprisingly so, as it were. Besides, she was not taking heed to any of my advances. In a facility that's purpose is to repopulate humanity after some crazy shit went down, a robot who identifies as Mother raises an embryo to maturity. Everything is going well until some rando stumbles upon the complex, leading to their relationship being tested, as well as daughter questioning Mother's previous statement about the world beyond the walls. Fucking hell, season 8 was shit. As I was watching I Am Mother, I couldn't help but make constant comparisons to 10 Cloverfield Lane. In terms of setup, they're very alike. A structure designed in the name of seclusion is ran by an individual who is playing host to someone they have made to believe that venturing outside would be detrimental to their existence. A second party is introduced from said outside world, which creates doubt, conspiracy, and they both start to wonder if the danger is beyond the sanctuary or amongst themselves. The most powerful aspect of this movie was the atmosphere. In my written review of 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I'm sure you all totally read, I said that the bunker was in its own right a character, that it perceived itself as a haven, but there was still something eerie about it which was very akin to its owner. The environment in I Am Mother has different qualities yet share the same vibe. Although extremely functional and provides sustain, it has no soul, there is no beauty, it's dark, metallic, echoey, and couldn't be more opposite to the meaning of homely if it tried. Think of your average Premier Inn, but coated in different shades of bleak and nowhere near as much of my baby batter glazed over the everything. The facility provides an ideal setting for the very intriguing story to unfold. Credit to the set designers and writers, of course, but that credit must be shared with the talent. Clara Ruggard is very much the heart of the movie and does the majority of the heavy lifting. Considering she only has 3 previous films to her name before taking up the role of protagonist in this one, I was very much impressed with her performance, and she didn't let the far more known and experienced Hilary Swank outshine her at any point. Swank isn't going full bore in this movie, but that's not to say she did a bad job, far from it in fact. She knows she isn't the star this time around and respects that this is Ruggard's opportunity to showcase her talent, thus fulfilling the support role perfectly, to the point where she received a nomination for an Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts Award for her contribution to this Australian-made motion picture. However, I couldn't bring myself to give the MVP award to anyone other than the people behind the character Mother, an accolade reflected by the AAC WCTA by nominating this movie for their Best Visual Effects or Animation Award. What I love about the making of the title character is that she has nothing to do with motion capture or any other form of digital trickery. The whole thing was designed, fabricated, and operated by Weta Workshop. Choosing to go with the dude in a suit approach instead of opting for CGI gives Mother more of a human demeanor that is very much complemented by the asymmetrical aspect of the robot, a la the panels on her chest and left arm that illuminate and emit heat whilst holding a child, as well as the right hand being more dexterous than its opposite, which according to Weta is for nurturing. Whatever the fuck that word means. Asked my parents, they didn't have a fucking clue either. My favourite attribute of Mother's characteristics are her facial expressions. Well done to the person in charge of the animatronics, because despite being limited to only having manipulation over the two little circles and lens thingy, there was still so much feeling that came with the most minuscule of movements. The vocals given to her are predominantly monotone with the occasional human-esque twang. I was surprised at how much range of emotion was expressed, all things considered. If I was to compare it to anything, I would say her throat was cut from the same cloth as an Echo Dot. They both appear to mean well but can be disdainful and sassy on the regs. Oh Alexa, why aren't you more sexually diverse? When these qualities are combined, they create a strong screen presence. At least 90% of the atmosphere that makes this movie so good comes courtesy of Mother. Even though the facility is by no means a small place, each room feels downsized when she occupies it. Not necessarily because she is overwhelming in stature. Hilary Swank is 5'6" and Mother doesn't really tower over her, so she isn't exactly in the Jaeger territory, but it's her ability to paint an entire room in omniscience that comes with traces of ominousness that is very much still there when Mother is not. For example, woman and daughter eventually conspire against Mother in the name of escaping to the outside world. A plan that obviously can't unfold in front of Mother's eyes, so it takes place when she is off screen. Aforementioned paint is still very much present, which creates so much suspense, especially when you can faintly hear her mechanical footsteps echoing in the not too distant background as the music, which at times reminded me of the score used in John Carpenter's The Thing, which amplified her entity all the way up to 11. I Am Mother will take up 113 minutes of your time and is worth every second of it. Yes, you can see the twist coming from practically the moment you press play, and it was perhaps revealed a smidgen too early. But other than that, the journey from beginning to end is beautiful, especially when it comes to that atmosphere that's filled with the same suspense and dread that you'd normally experience whilst waiting for the results of a pregnancy test. Not that I would ever know how that feels, of course, my pull-out game is strong as fuck. For me, Godzilla King of the Monsters was the most disappointing movie of 2019. This won't be a popular decision, and if it's any consolation, I expected it to be amongst the elated. On paper, this was designed to be my film of the year. Huge fuck-off monsters fighting each other, people dying everywhere, Charles Dance and Asian twins. Well, they're portrayed by the same person, but my fleshlight does not need to know that. I could easily criticize the writers for producing a story filled with characters completely bereft of originality, making it impossible for me to give even the most microscopic poo particle about what happens to them. Except for you guys, of course. Never stop being you. I could go into detail about how the dialogue never quite matches the tone the moment is going for. I could give an in-depth analysis about how good the sound engineering is or how gorgeous the creatures look. I could also dedicate copious amounts of time to giving examples of Kyle Chandler trying too hard in places and phoning it in during other scenes, making his performance quite a frustrating watch. And I could easily rant for ages about this movie being so anticlimactic that not even Charles Dance could save it from this banner. But there would be no fucking point, because I didn't go watch King of the Monsters expecting to be submerged in a deep and complex narrative whilst experiencing the best acting I'd ever seen, portraying the most well-rounded and authentic characters in the history of cinema. Fairy god motherfucking no, far from it. I went for the Titan versus Titan slobber knocker, and if you went as well, so did you. The reason why this sequel to a superior movie sits under this banner is purely down to the action. After the film took us through 42 minutes of meh, we finally got to round one. The hype was very much believed. They both looked like they made weight, and the stare down, mwah. The bell rings, and when it came to the moment I'd been patiently waiting for, the cinematography hits the fuck it button, resulting in the fight looking like it was filmed through a fucking magnifying glass for the next 90 seconds. And if you're thinking that it zoomed out to at least mid-shot territory for the rest of the bout, then you'd be very mistaken. A minute and a half is the grand total of time they went at it, which pisses me off because there were several scenes involving shit I couldn't care less about that should have been traded in for more of the reason I went to see this movie. We reached the hour mark, and Ghidorah is now taking on a pterodactyl that looks like it recently inadvertently foul badonkadonk first into a barbecue. Less than 15 seconds of screen time was dedicated to that scrap in the name of making way for round 2, which was not only shorter than their previous encounter, clocking in at a mere 40 seconds for the record, but it seemed like the zoom lens decided to snort cocaine off the fuck it button, making the whole thing look like a super close-up of two kaiju maniacs competing in a swimming pool for the only available orgasm. The third round happens roughly 40 minutes later. Initially, it looked like this was going to be the showdown I had been craving since the trailer dropped. Godzilla looked like he had embraced a diet of weightlifting and steroids. They had a better arena with many toys at their disposal as well as tag team partners thrown in there for the lols. The moment was finally here. And did it make up for the previous lackluster attempts at an epic face-off between these iconic titans? Of course it fucking didn't. The camera went back into old habits when the screen was theirs exclusively for the last brawl, which they had for a shockingly low amount of minutes, 5 of the remaining 20 to be precise. The other 15 focused on the perspective belonging to our protagonists, with the fight providing background, which was irritating because honestly, who gives a fuck if the parents find their daughter amongst the ruins when you could be finding out how that bus came to be? Fucking cock tease of a movie. Godzilla King of the Monsters advertises itself as a 2-hour plus long clash of the titans, but in reality only has said titans clashing fully on screen for less than 10 minutes, and when they do, it's far from worth the wait. So you can see why it's here. It feels like the title character was a support act and all scenes involving him were built around the human storyline, which is more obtuse than me accommodating the gladiators before hiring contractors to build the fuck arena of mine. It's just the wrong way around, but do you get it? Fuck arena of mine. It's a power rhyme of that Zelda game. You know, the one with the ocarina, and that's why... Nah, fuck it. I can't remember the last time a movie met my expectations more accurately than Countdown. I wanted to go see a copy and paste supernatural horror movie that I can laugh at during as well as afterwards, and fuck me, it delivered. For those of you listening who don't know the plot, a bunch of people download an app that tells you how long you have left to live. For some it says decades, and for others much, much shorter. Naturally, it's seen as a joke at first, but unfortunately for our protagonist Quinn, it's legit. And her countdown is only 2 days long, so it's up to her to stop this supernatural phenomenon before it's too late. Remember in Final Destination, they had the characters that survived the incident die progressively throughout the movie, resulting in a consistent flow of intricate death scenes? Yeah, that wasn't the case at all here. There are a couple of lackluster deaths during the first act, but after that we just followed Quinn et al. Around on their mission to stop the app and had to wait until the very end for another death scene. The problem for me is when I watch a horror movie of any nature, I want a high death toll. Especially in this case because the characters are way too generic for me to be interested in their lives. So to have the outcome of the film's success resting on these farts in the wind was a silly idea. A bloodbath involving many disposable people would have been a better option for sure. Countdown doesn't even entertain the idea of originality. Instead, it opts to stumble down that beaten, haggard and fatigued path taken by supernatural horror movies that should have been closed off after Sinister walked down it back in 2012. You know the exact route I'm on about, but since I've got nothing on outside of polishing off an entire slab of char-grilled halloumi without giving a fuck, I'll give you the tour anyway. No, please, after you, I want to follow your snail trail. We begin with a run-of-the-mill death scene to set the tone that this genre has never attempted to deviate from. Then we move on to our protagonist introducing themselves before they escort us through a couple of failed jump scares en route to making acquaintance with some gypsy-esque or religious figure who informs us said protagonist that the paranormal activity, see what I did there, that's been plaguing their life is caused by some demon twat that's still pissed off about some shit that happened to it way back in the day. We then arrive at the ritual recommended to our protagonist by our previous stop that's designed to banish the ghoulie. The ritual then proceeds to give us the illusion of success. This illusion continues until the very end and ceases when the ghoulie gives us one final hurrah. Cue the credits, thus concluding the tour of 99.9% of the supernatural horror genre. Please be sure to tip your guide before he tips you. Countdown very much sticks to that routine. It's the same shit with different faces. Two things stood out to me. Part of its narrative was stolen from Happy Death Day to You, a la the whole doctor being way out of line with his colleague thing. Obviously, subjects of this nature are very sensitive in the film industry at present, and for one of the characters to flat out say the name of a movement against sexual harassment during this particular scene was certainly the most memorable and compelling moment of the movie, but a flash of intrigue doesn't make up for, well, this. Also, 60 gigabytes of memory for one app. Get the fuck out of here. Yes, I know some phones contain that amount of storage, but there is no way you would dedicate the equivalent of 48 high-definition films, 18,000 songs and all 10 seasons of Friends 3 times over for a fucking timer app. Fuck that. I'd rather fill my phone up with necessities like Ecosia and anything that sends me constant updates regarding the precise location of Karen Fukuhara. For a while I was struggling to find something suitable for the middle tier of the podium. Countdown was destined to always be there the moment pre-production started, and this cancer caught on camera firmly locked its position as it was unravelling itself in front of my tormented eyes. So as I was waiting for the magnet of inspiration to start pulling, I remembered that the new Hellboy movie was released in 2019 and was also complete dog shit. Before I go into this, I feel I should say that yes, I am a fan of Guillermo del Toro's work, but I bizarrely wasn't aware that the original Hellboy movies were a part of his filmography until after I saw the first one. Oh, spare me your judgment. I was a latecomer to this franchise, plus I didn't start building this shithouse until 8 years after the original was released. For the record, I preferred Hellboy 1 over the Golden Army. I just thought the narrative tone and action achieved more synergy than its sequel, and the fact that David Hyde Pierce didn't reprise his previously uncredited role as the voice of Abe Sapien was somewhat disgruntling, but that's not me throwing shade at the Golden Army. Let me put it another way. I really like cheese on toast, but pizza wins every time, and cheese on toast knows that. Hellboy 2019 was originally intended to be the third and final chapter in the film series, without Del Toro returning as writer/director for reasons that have always been coated in speculation. Some say that the creator of the Hellboy comics didn't like Del Toro's interpretation of his work, so he wanted someone else at the helm. Others say that it was because of conflicting schedules, and some people say this, that, and that, etc, etc, etc. Regardless of the reason, Guillermo del Toro was not to contribute to this movie in any fashion, which resulted in Ron Perlman refusing to reprise his role as the title character. The idea of a trilogy was scrapped. David Harbour was announced as the new Hellboy, a reboot was born, and the masses wept. Inevitably, there are going to be comparisons between the second worst movie of the year and its predecessors, but rest assured, Hellboy 2019 isn't here because when placed next to the originals, it looks like the worst example of cosplaying since my attempt at Aquaman. I brought the very suit Momoa used in the movie, and one accidental flex made me feel more like Bruce Banner than Arthur Curry, but I digress. No sir, even as a standalone project, Hellboy 2019 very much belongs here. The opening narration tries way too fucking hard. It attempts to cover up its lack of quality with swearing, which is my thing, so back the fuck off. Sticking with the profanities if I may. Unlike Del Toro's live-action adaptations of the comic books, Hellboy 2019 is classified as a 15 according to the British Board of Film Classification, meaning it can cuss to its heart's content and strong violence is permitted. Awesome stuff. I'm always up for reboots or sequels stepping up to the R-rated plate. However, this reboot in particular doesn't really know what to do with such an opportunity. Don't get me wrong, the movie is littered with obscenities, but it felt like they were stamped on top of pre-existing dialogue. The hypocrisy isn't lost on me. I am aware that I too like to throw the occasional naughty word into my script for the fuck of it, but I do so with far more finesse, style, elegance, and grace whilst keeping it classy as fuck. As far as the violence is concerned, yeah, the action was alright in places I guess, but it wasn't exactly pushing its rating to the limit, and you could really fucking tell when the combat was taking place in front of a green screen. Also, the quality of the special effects and prosthetics were wildly inconsistent, resulting us never achieving the gorgasm that it so desperately wanted us to have. Oh, and movie, if you're given the green light to do R-rated action, don't dilute your violence by depositing classic rock all over it. Leave that kind of crap to Marvel. Take heed to the Doom remakes and open up your minds to the power of the gent. I'm obviously on about the new Doom games, not the films. Jesus Christ, those films. When I was preparing to write about David Harbour's performance, the temptation to just abandon analysis and dedicate the next few slides to Ron Perlman fisting him was almost overwhelming at times. Yes, Harbour's Hellboy is inferior in every single way when stacked against Perlman's, and it is very easy to just launch tar and feathers at the actor then call it a night. A sin I confess to being guilty of in the past, but that was completely justified, so fuck it. But in truth, you can't point all the fingers of blame at David Harbour. One of them should definitely be all up in the face of whoever it was that decided not to inject any dosage of badassery into Hellboy's personality. Instead, they made him softer than a shit sponge. A bit of a pussy at times and easily intimidated by the sort of people that Perlman's version would have treated like a glorified wet wipe before discarding them as such. Another one of those fingers should be pointing at the artist in charge of David Harbour's makeup prosthetics, because it was laid on so thick that his facial expressions were harder to read than the Silmarillion. Also, what the fuck was with that line of hair down the front of him that kept vanishing and reappearing during the whole film? Did he feel like it was holding him back aerodynamically at times, so he decided to remove it before engagements? Was he going through some sort of identity crisis that kept him handcuffed to a bottle of Veet? Either way, who gives a fuck? If I was in charge of that shit, I would have made a fucking decision, because I know that type of crap is very distracting, easily noticed, and I'm also fully aware that pricks like me won't hesitate to highlight it. You may have noticed that the final finger is pointing at David Harbour's dick hole. This is very apt because he simply didn't have the vocal cords ballsy enough to provide the voice one would expect to come out of a demon raised from hell that's destined to destroy the world at some point, but has spent his years on Earth torturing his throat with booze and tobacco. When combined, all of these qualities, let's say, give the title character practically no screen presence. I never expected David Harbour to be half the Hellboy Ron Perlman was. It would be unreasonable for me to do so, but I did not expect the overall portrayal to fall so flat it could easily be mistaken for a pancake covered in the breasts belonging to Macy Williams. Ah man, that would have been a good way to end this section of the review, but I've still got shit to say about it. The product placement was shamelessly indiscreet. Fucking puppets need to grasp the concept of subtlety. Hellboy & Co. appears to have borrowed Littlefinger's teleportation device because they seem to be able to reach places just in the nick of time despite their starting points being significantly further away than the ones belonging to our antagonists, one of which actually has the ability to teleport. The main villain is an almighty witch filled with generic motives played by Milla Jovovich, hence why I just put that quirky hat on one of my Resident Evil animations because like fuck was I going to put more effort into it than that. The pig is helping her restore lost powers on a promise that she will basically juice him up in the name of settling a personal vendetta he has with Hellboy. Jovovich does the best with what she is given, but I genuinely found the pig's origin story and what fuels his agenda more compelling than our main baddie, which frankly shouldn't be the case. But because Jovovich's role was forged by a lack of originality and bad writing, I was more in favour of getting my pork on instead of, well, getting my pork on. There are other monsters, but their screen time doesn't really extend beyond the trailers, and when in hordes they resemble a cheap pixelated clusterfuck that was a failed attempt to fatten out empty calories. Dialogue is stolen from the previous movies, which came across as a sad effort at inflicting nostalgia but only succeeds in reminding us that we are watching an inferior Hellboy film. I couldn't tell you how loyal this reboot was to its source material, but it gave me the impression that it picked random snippets from the comics, taped them together and hoped to fuck that some form of narrative came out of it. But unfortunately for movie, the editing was to be conducted by someone who has been binging on way too much Leatherface and sleep deprivation. Drawing the support cast seems like a waste of time at this point, which is a shame because those dreadlocks took the piss. Much like the acceptance-themed dilemma Hellboy has to go through during this re-envision, these characters have been done better elsewhere and indeed in other Hellboy movies. I like Ian McShane, but he is clearly here for the Skrilla. Alice is a powerful spirit medium who, when contacting the dead, has the ghost come out of her mouth because I have to ask, why couldn't the process appear more paranormal instead of choosing to make them look like all the sperm she has swallowed over the years has mutated within her and occasionally decides to come up for air? Truthfully, couldn't remember this guy's name and I refused to look it up on principle alone. He's very anti-monster but has to take regular injections of something for reasons you can see coming a mile off because it's been done 1,000 times prior to this. Look, movie, if I wanted to see someone taking substances to suppress a monster from surfacing, I would hang up a mirror before I start chugging on a bottle of diazepam until the urges begin to fade. In addition to all of this, the movie is way too fucking long. As you can see, the initial runtime is shorter than its ancestors. But unlike the other two, you have to wait a further 12 minutes for a cutscene that's setting up for a sequel that's reportedly extremely unlikely to happen because not only did it receive negative reception from fans and critics alike, but it also didn't manage to break even at box office, confirming that Hellboy 2019 is a disaster in every possible way. And if I was Guillermo del Toro, I would be wanking over how hilarious awful it is until my wrists started to beg for Bengay. When it came to writing about the worst movie of 2019, I felt like a morally flexible PE teacher with a bulimania because I simply didn't know where to start. Wolf is a perfect example of Murphy's Law because anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. When I bore witness to the trailer, I thought that I was in for a shit version of Dog Soldiers featuring Romans that also desperately wanted to be Game of Thrones, which on reflection would have been a reprieve compared to the reality. The movie possesses some of the worst cinematography that I have ever seen. Some of the shots are lens flared to absolute fuck. The majority of the others are either under or overexposed, which on several occasions made the same scene look like it was taking place at different times of the day, resulting in any chance immersion had of showing up deteriorate as the seconds passed. Also, the aerial perspectives look like they were captured by a tramadol-powered drone that's piloted by someone on the back end of an insomnia-fueled coke binge. The acting is atrocious. The dialogue deliverance is shocking. It felt like the entire cast were reading and reciting the script for the first time as the cameras were rolling. But the worst part regarding the dialogue for me was the unnecessary pause that the actors frequently took between their lines during a conversation. Given the nature of what was being said, the awkward and needless silences definitely weren't an attempt to create suspense and tension. Trust me, this is just bad acting combined with equally shit editing. Wolf falls under the category of action horror and fails dramatically at delivering anything associated with the genre. The action is modest to say the very least. Yes, it looked bad because shit costumes costumes. And as the fighting took place, the sound effects dubbed over the visuals were mostly way off sync and exaggerated as fuck. But the costume design and audio syncrasy aside, I have seen better medieval combat executed by hungover working class heroes at battle reenactment festivals. Considering this was meant to be a group of elite Roman legionnaires, they looked like rookies during conflict. If I were to believe this was an accurate interpretation of how the Romans fought, I'd wonder how the fuck they managed to conquer Britain all those years ago, considering I could easily wipe out this group of bellends with a foam bat covered in tampons and a couple of randoms I dragged out of Wetherspoons that afternoon. The horror elements very much play to the standards of the action. The only reason I, and indeed anyone else, would go see this worthless squirt of octopus discharge is to see a giant, hairy, tooth and nailed up motherfucker tear through Roman soldiers like I tear through my overdraft during a bank holiday weekend. Clearly this request didn't materialise. For most of the 85-minute duration, the only glimpse of the werewolves came courtesy of a POV of them spying on our protagonist from a bush, or fleshy blurs crossing the screen, which got really boring really fucking fast, especially since the wait felt like an eternity. Seriously, there were many instances where I found myself gawping at trees for an agonising amount of time before the predictability decided to show up. Not until the last 20 minutes or so did we get to the grand reveal. Sorry, that wasn't very professional, but then again, neither was the movie. The aforementioned giant, hairy, tooth and nailed up motherfucker was nowhere to be seen. The great mystery that had been kept from us for well over 2.5 acts turned out to be the fucking dickholes from Team Roman that were killed off screen earlier on in the movie. Except now they're topless, wearing contact lenses, have slightly longer teeth and sporting the worst pedicure that I have ever seen. Fuck knows where their sires were. Maybe there wasn't enough money left over from the Tramadrone budget to hire extras. If Wolf presented itself to me in the form of a movie made by film students using whatever gear they could salvage from their university's equipment room and fuck all budget, then it simply wouldn't be here. In fact, I may have even met it halfway. Fuck, I might even respect it. Sort of, maybe, but probably not though. This thing was shown at the cinema. You'd have to pay roughly the same amount as you would to see a blockbuster with an all-star cast and a six-figured budget, etc., for the fucking privilege of being ripped off. The movie was written and directed by Stuart Brennan, who also stars as one of the protagonists. Brennan has a BAFTA as well as many other trophies awarded by esteemed film festivals to his name, so you'd expect a certain standard from someone with those kinds of accolades. I confess to not having seen any of his previous work, but judging from Wolf alone, giving him one of the most sought-out pieces of silverware the industry has to offer is the equivalent of the Academy watching one of my reviews for the first time before shortly throwing a doctorate of film studies at me. It was also very apparent that not a lot of research had gone into its source material. Yes, the story is orientated around werewolves who are, as previously mentioned, misrepresented on a shameful level as far as traditional Lycan lore is concerned, but the component of the movie that lacks the most realism is the authenticity regarding the Romans. Well, I wouldn't go as far as to call them Romans because their accents were extremely English. Yeah, I get that recruitment is a thing, but these people were meant to be legionnaires, a title that only full-blooded Romans were permitted to hold, and I say this with all due respect. There was never any female presence amongst the Roman military ranks. Not to mention that this film was set in 150 AD, yet all the characters are speaking modern English. Look, I'm no historian, and neither am I an ambassador for anything related to language. Clearly. But these errors couldn't even slip past my poorly constructed net. What I do know is film, and Wolf isn't a good one. It's a complete waste of any resource used during construction. It's a waste of whatever method of transport you take to get your screening, and naturally is a massive waste of your time and money. The exact same thing can be said about its fellow podium attendees. They share a combined runtime of 296 minutes, which in terms of grand scheme isn't even a drop in the ocean, but if you truly want to pour minutes, hours, effort and finances into frivolousness, then I recommend building an Airbnb in the center of Chernobyl.